Hey, it's Fitz, and I just wanted to thank you for checking out the Rock Radio podcast. I wanted to do a little plug for my own company here, RockVox Recording and Production. If you have any needs for podcasting or video production or voiceover, look no further than RockVox Recording and Production. You can find us at rockvox.com or the social media platform of your choice. A full-service podcast and video podcast studio at your fingertips right here in Bushnell's Basin, just a short drive from the city of Rochester. Check us out, rockvox.com.
Round, go the records.
4.5 minutes after 9 o'clock our time on BBF, home of the busiest bees in radio.
Time for lunch.
Lunchtime.
Rock and roll lunch.
It's lunch.
Lunch hour.
Go in the lunchroom.
Yes, I'm hungry.
All right, so let's give this a shot.
Okay.
For Rock Radio podcast.
I'm honored.
And Dave Kane, the legendary Dave Kane.
So they tell me.
So one thing that I wanted to tell you was when, for the short time that I was working with you over at those radio stations, when I would fill in for you, right? And I was like, I'm filling in on freaking CMF. No, I'm not from Rochester, so I'm not, I didn't grow up with that, hearing that all the time and stuff, but I knew from other people that CMF was like a big deal, and Dave Kane and middays was a big deal. So I was like, holy shit, I'm filling in for Dave Kane here. Who am I, this jerk off from South Florida? And one thing you told me afterwards. Oh no, it was when I was filling in for in the morning show.
Okay.
I was the temporary producer,
right?
And you were coming in next, and you would say, zero out the board for me. Make sure you zero out the board. So that became my habit. Like I could not help myself when I left the studio to zero it all out.
Well, same thing with me. That's why I tell whoever, I got to zero it out when I leave.
And so when I went over to the other group that I was working for, everybody would break my balls all the time about it. They'd be like, you don't need to do that. You don't need to do that. I'm like, I can't help it.
Well, let's clarify. Zeroing it out means you put down all the, you take everything out of program that doesn't need to be in program, all the mics that were being used, everything. And then I can just come in and say, okay, it's blank. Okay, here's all I need right here.
Right.
So that's what we mean by zero it out.
Thank you. And a safety measure so that some Yahoo doesn't come in there and actually end up on the air somehow.
Right.
So I got, razzled quite a few times by that. And I'm like, but Dave Kane taught me that. I'm like,
well, somebody taught me this. Somebody, used to tell me, would you zero out the board, please? So I just passed it along.
So go back to when you first started in radio, or actually before that. How did you know that was your calling?
I didn't.
You didn't?
It
Did you
just,
fall into it?
It was what you call serendipity. And, I came up to the Western New York area to go to school at Brockport. They were the first college to accept me. I grew up in the New York City area. Actually, I always spent my formative years in the New York City area. I literally grew up here because I was up here full time from the time I was 21. So I graduated from Brockport, and I'd actually gone to school there and started as a journalism major. I was always very into newspapers and still am. Of course, my model at the time was the New York Times. I was very familiar with that. It's a very prestigious paper. It seems like a pretty good career. So I started taking journalism classes and realized, this is a whole lot of writing, and this was back when you had to write or maybe got to use a typewriter. But more than that, one of my biggest beliefs in any of education is that an instructor can make such a huge difference, either positive or negative, in how you approach a subject or a discipline. And the instructor at the time was not my favorite person, and she seemed to be kind of edgy towards men in general. So I just happened to be taking an intro to broadcasting class at the same time. And the instructor there was a guy who had done some radio in the Midwest and small town, but he gave a very passionate speech one day about how if you're really into this, you should go down to the college radio station and get involved. So I did, kind of as a curiosity. And, I started off filing records and then reading news and then doing, a weekend air shift and then doing a more regular air regulars like twice a week.
Right.
And I got bitten by the bug because I was in a great surrounding. There was a lot of learning going on, not even so much in the classrooms as there was with other like-minded people who were passionate about radio, and we were doing it. Even though the college radio station in Brockport was what was called carrier current, meaning it wasn't broadcast, it was carried through wires to the campus buildings. That was it. But, when you got in that studio and put the headphones on and talked into the mic, you were on the radio.
Yeah.
And it just started progressing where I switched that to my major and took all manner of writing and performance and improv classes and things, and was really enjoying it to the point where when it got to, last semester of senior year, I said, I think I'll give this a shot. So, a couple of months after I graduated, it was September of 79, I got my first gig in Geneva doing weekend overnights. We did 5 minutes of news at the top of every hour. I remember I got the job. The program director told me, he says, I hired you because you could read news, which meant I knew how to read, and not stumble. But it was playing, not my favorite music, Commodores and Linda Ronstadt, soft rock. But I was on the radio, and I was making $1.35 a week plus insurance, living in Geneva, a nice little town. And but it was more, there was more I wanted to do. I wanted to get back to Rochester. The reason I stayed up here after college, because it was unrealistic to want to go back to the number one market in the world and start knocking on doors.
Sure.
So I got the job in Geneva, and I had a friend who was working back in Rochester at the old Magic 92. And after, sending a bunch of tapes and being cast as the pushy guy, because I kept calling the program director, the late, great Bernie Kimball, and saying, hey, so what do you think? What do you think? And my friend Charlie, who was working there, got in his ear and said, get the guy out of Geneva, give him a shot. So he did. And I gave up. At that time, I was full-time in Geneva, 6 nights a week, midnight to 6. And I gave that up, the big $135 a week, to come back and be available as a part-timer. And fairly quickly, I went from weekends to being a full-time part-timer, where I started doing overnights for $3.50 an hour. And then my friend Charlie, who was doing 7 to midnight, decided he was off to greener pastures, and I got moved into evenings. And depending on how many employees we had, it was either 6 to 10 at night or 7 to midnight. Most often it was 7 to midnight. And that's where I really started getting interested. I'm here, I'm on at night, I'm up in a high-rise in downtown Rochester, I'm playing rock and roll music, and I'm talking to people on the phone. I was out of my mind. And so that lasted about 13 months, and this is just another example of being in the right place at the right time. I was with my friend, the late Don Michael Gerard. He was a morning guy at the old Top 40 on AM 95 BBF. And we were literally coming back from lunch one day, and we're riding in the car, and the midday guy on WCMF, his name was Bill Martin. He said, hey, this is my last show, see you, bye. And I literally got to the first phone I could, which was a payphone. And I called the program director, and I said, hey, what are you doing about middays? And he says, I'm looking. And I said, I'm interested. So we met on a Wednesday. He hired me on a Friday, and I started the following Monday, which was last week of February of 1981.
Wow.
Yeah. And then it was an uninterrupted run with the exception of a 91-day imposed exile, let's call it, when the station ownership changed hands, and my contract was up that year, and they didn't renew it, the new company. And we were all being paid stupid money at the time for this market. So lasted 91 days, and I ended up having to reapply for the position, and got the job. And they hired me as the program director, not necessarily a position I wanted, but it was the only way to get back in. So
and were you on air as program
I was
director?
on air. I was on middays, and I was doing all the other stuff. And I quickly realized not so quickly, but after about 6 months, I said, man, I am in over my head, because the program director's job in this century is different from the original program director's job. Pick the music, plan promotions, work with the air staff, end of story.
Right.
It's a management position, and there's budgeting, and there's meetings, and there's projections, and there's this and that and the other thing. And it just wasn't for me.
Yeah.
What I've always been most adept at, not so much being a captain, but being a good lieutenant. And I was tasked pretty much for the last easily 30 years with running the physical plant, taking care of the music scheduling and the automation settings and the computers, everything under the sun. And that's what I was comfortable with, because I'm detail oriented, and I was able to do that. And it freed up the program director to do the meetings and the budgets and all this other crap.
All the crap you don't want to do.
That I didn't want to do.
Yeah.
So I was having a blast.
Yeah.
And, over the years, I was afforded, leeway in terms of what I played on the air because, I had the what do you call it? The longevity already behind me, but I had the, what's the word I'm looking for? I had the, I can't think of the word. I had the background, and I knew how to frame things. If I was going to play something wacky, you knew that on either side of it was going to be something well-known and familiar context. There's always context to what I was doing. And so it became very enjoyable because I didn't have to stick to the same 350 songs and was given that. And it was embraced by the listeners. And my thing was always, about the music. Just tell people a little something interesting about the music, be incidental, by the way, it should always be, hey, by the way, give them something, just a little nugget. You don't have to give a dissertation.
Right.
And so then I just played to my strengths, and man, it lasted for 40 years. I did it till it wasn't fun anymore. And for a lot of people now, it's not fun. For a lot of people who left the industry, they also said, this ain't fun anymore.
Yeah.
And it really, it broke my heart to realize that. It was the first time in 41 years I said, this is not fun anymore. It became such drudgery, not my air shift, but all the background, just corporate nonsense and
the business.
Yeah, the business end. I mean, if it was always about commerce, but last couple of years they really, underline, boldface, italicized. It's about commerce. Yeah. It's about the stock price. It's about answering to a board of directors.
Right.
And so at this time last year, August of last year, the only thing that was on my mind was getting extension a contract, which was going to be up at the end of September of last year. And I wanted to be able to get to my 40th anniversary, which was in February of this year. So I wasn't thinking retirement. It was a vague concept. Yeah, sometime I'll retire. But I got the extension for a year, and they said, "So what do you think? You're going to stay for?" Yeah, I'll stay. You stay. I'll stay for another year. Would you stay for 2? Would you stay for 3? Yeah, absolutely. So I said, okay. So they got back to me and said, we're going to give you a 1-year extension because of the pandemic, and anybody who's in a contract year, we're just going to give an extension. I said, great. So at that point, since I was, running the factory, the physical plant, and we were working remotely, they didn't see the need to keep my boss because, well, a lot of decisions were coming from over his head anyway, and I was running the physical plant and popular on the air. So they got rid of my boss, and I got, a little bit more work, not unexpected. But at this point, we're working at home. I don't see any of my beloved coworkers. I'm in front of a computer Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 6, literally. Saturday, anywhere from 3 to 5 hours doing some work. Sunday, checking in to make sure the automation is working, everything's on time. So, I used to say on the air, in jest, hey, we never close. We're open 24/7. Well, there has to be content and stuff there and somebody to make sure it's running. But it became so intrusive into it became, I was overwhelmed by it. It was just overtaking my life. Now, granted, during the pandemic, I'm home alone. Not anybody had much of a life, but whatever life I had was being consumed by the job. And there were more unpopular, in my opinion, things coming down from corporate about this and that and the other thing. I go, boy, this is not fun. So by October last year, that's when I first said, this is starting to be not fun. By Thanksgiving, I said, this is definitely not fun. And I started thinking about retirement. By Christmas, I'd made up my mind. I'll get to my 40th anniversary, then all bets are off. And, things were continuing along. I got to my anniversary. I said, I'm giving them 3 weeks. Ended up being 5 weeks so I could, collect on a bonus and keep insurance for another month. And then that was it. 5 weeks. It was 40 years, 5 weeks, and 5 days.
Wow.
Yeah.
That was one hell of a career, though.
Yeah, and everything, and it wasn't just the professional considerations. There are a lot of personal considerations. I'm in my early 60s now, and
you look good.
Thank you. I feel retirement agrees with me. I'm
I
well
was
rested.
going to say,
I'm not stressed.
Some people, when they get done with retire or when they're on retirement, they're like, freaking out, and you walk in like, hey,
I got plenty to do. And again, it all dovetailed nicely. There were enough personal reasons. Certainly, one's own mortality, especially when in the span of 14 months, I lost 6 friends in my age group to various, cancer, maladies, bad luck, whatever. So that gives you some perspective as well. And really, I said, all right, it all just made sense. I'm going to wrap this up. My financial guy said, hey, as long as you, don't go nuts, you can retire. So I didn't go nuts, and now I'm retired. And, people say, do you miss it? And I go, I miss being on the air, but that's about it. I don't miss any. And I miss, having seen my coworkers. But at that point, there was
nobody to see.
Right. I'd already been out of contact for the most part for the better part of a year. And business being the way it is, they'd pretty much gutted all the stations of live talent anyway, except morning shows. So, I was on, midday shows, not because of anything I did or didn't do or ratings, but middays were on the corporate radar as being not necessary. I did middays. And I know that to the credit of, my local managers, they ran blocking for me. Said, no, we're not going to get rid of them just because you guys don't want to do live middays. We'll figure something out. And they did, God bless them. Of course, it was 2 years in a row that they said, got to lose the midday guy. So, again, not unexpected. It was it wasn't pleasant to think about, but I knew everything that happened and has happened in radio was not unforeseen and not unexpected. But the pandemic certainly ramped things up in terms of the timeline of, all right, now we can get rid of all these people. Now we can automate more. Now we can bring outside voices in and follow the same playbook. Basically it's standardized and homogenized. And that's the thing I'm most bitter about, is that live and local was deemed to be not important anymore. Content over local. And I just thought that it's so unfair to the markets, Rochester size and smaller, where you have a much better chance of people of forming that connection and being part of a community, not being faceless. I never expected, when I was growing up listening to radio in New York City, that I would see, a personality at the supermarket or at a movie. Chances are pretty slim because it's a big town.
Right.
But here, it's a big, small town.
Yep.
And, strictly because of the time that, people spend here, you form that connection. People see you. They know you're a regular dude. You shop at Wegmans, see you at the emergency room, whatever. You're not in some untouchable ivory tower. You're part of the community. And it really bugs me that, the company that owns CMF for the last 13, 14 years, it was stations like CMF, markets like that size and smaller, that this company made their bones on so that they could move into the big leagues. They made it there on our backs and then cast us away, gutted all the stations of live talent and cut off all but the most minimal funding. And I said, that really blows.
Oh, yeah.
So that's what I don't miss.
Going back, when automation first started coming in, how did you see that? Like when it first started happening, did you see it as a bad thing possibly, or is it?
Well, let me just say, when I started radio in 79, I worked at a semi-automated station already.
Really?
It was, they had live talent. But all the music was automated and on a schedule. It was all on these big reel-to-reel tapes, and you just hit the on button, the off button.
Okay.
And that's it. But they also used it for some weekend times. But it wasn't, not having somebody in the studio wasn't something that became a thing until I think after the turn of the century. Of course, the technology is great, and it was very convenient, allowed you to do all manner of things, and one of them was automation. So the first shift to go was overnights because it's unrated and they don't need to pay somebody, full-time salary and benefits, which made me think, boy, howdy, if Uncle Roger hadn't been murdered 18 years ago, he would have lost his job anyway. Jeez. And then the next air shift to go, because they could automate, was 7 to midnight on a classic rock station, evenings, kind of a push. They put hockey in there. And, the ratings were always just so-so, never better than so-so, so much competition. And they got Sabres hockey on there. And then they, in an effort to build the brand of a very successful afternoon show in Seattle called The Men's Room, they started to syndicate it among their company stations. So we were one of the first. So, yeah, why not? We'll try that. And it took a little while, but it started to catch on. And then pandemic, and then the company said, you know what, we can't afford to pay for the satellite link for all of the syndication, so the men's room went away. So we just,
That was the one that was in the afternoons?
No,
men's room?
Well, it was afternoons in Seattle, and we carried 2 hours of it. We carried the last 2 hours of it from 7 to 9 live.
Oh, okay.
So 7 to 9 here was the first 2 hours, 3 to 5 there in Seattle. So we carried that, and it was all right. Then they just automated everything because they could. Basically, the technology for scheduling, it's awesome. It's so convenient and allows you to do so many things, unfortunately, including getting rid of live
humans.
talent. Yeah. But again, that's not new in any industry. Right. Robotics and automation. And the bottom line is you cut expenses to make money. Live talent were expenses. For a little while, I was an asset, but then I went back to being an expense. But the automation itself, I guess when we started doing it overnights, years ago, after Uncle Roger died, they never got a live talent in there again. We would all take turns like voice tracking, but there was no need to hire anybody because we had the capacity to just automate it. Yeah. And the technology kept improving, and to the point where you couldn't tell that I was at home for 13 months doing my show. Hats off to our engineers who really, that whole turnover. It was March of 2020. I'd gone on vacation, did my last show in the station, and then when I came back, things were ramping up. It was mid-March. I said, "No, you're doing it from home," and they really scrambled and got us sounding really, really good. But again, I enjoyed working from home, but missed the back and forth with listeners. And, certainly with my coworkers. And I had a landline at home, but I wasn't going to give that out to talk to people. They'd still be calling me, "You got to come back." So, the writing was on the wall. And again, not unexpected, but the pandemic and the realization at the corporate level that, wow, we can do all of this and help, boost the stock price. So that's what they did. And that's what it is. And that's how it will continue. Hub and spoke programming with, one format based out of this area with all the jocks in that, going to X number of stations. It's more or less being done that way. And certainly my company was not the first. They copied it, the playbook from other companies that have done it. And that's basically the basic playbook right now. And they're going beyond radio. Instead of being a radio company, it's a media company.
Content company.
Yeah, I remember having words with my boss over it. And I was saying, why this? Why this? And he says, because we're media. I says, no. I'm in broadcasting. I'm in radio. He says, no, you're in media. And I got what he was saying. And I said, all right, I don't necessarily like that classification because I'm a broadcaster. And I will always be a broadcaster. I was in radio. I wasn't in media per se. But that was just semantics.
You know how to say the word. You know how to say W, for Christ's sake.
Yeah, W, or occasionally I would say W. W. That was George Bush's middle name, W.
What would you do if you had a radio station right now? If someone said, "Here's a nice, reasonably powered radio station in
I've thought of
Rochester size."
Yeah, I've thought of that, even small. First of all, it takes a lot of money to run even a small radio station. And then, of course, you got to constantly be beating the bricks to get advertising revenue. And, of course, now the revenue is spread to, do you want digital assets? Do you want to be advertising on our podcast? Do you want to be on our website? Do you want to be this? So many different variations. Other than I want to buy some commercials between 6 and 10 in the morning. So there's a lot to do. And even like a big business, you got to worry about, how am I going to make money at this and keep my expenses down? Yeah. Do I hire live people? Do I automate? Yeah. There's too many questions. It's not as simple. But if I had a radio station now, I would have it live and local, and I would have it be unique the way CMF used to be, reflecting the musical taste of the community and being a part of it. And instead of what a lot of radio stations have become, which is essentially a loudspeaker for their company's brand. I turn on my old station now, and twice an hour, they're actively encouraging you to listen to other music on the app. So basically, the radio stations just become part of an app. Yeah. That's all we are. We're just a stop. So, hey, and I understand, if you're a a Detroit Tigers fan or something, you can tune in our Detroit stations to listen to Tigers games. But now they have, like many other, like Spotify and Pandora, they have customized music lists. You like heavy metal? They got all heavy metal stations, very much like satellite too. And they're actively encouraging you to listen, not in so many words, to the local station, but just be part of the bigger picture. And again, in markets this size, I think it's a crime to deprive radio listeners of that connection to somebody who's in their community and can reflect on things, as opposed to an outsider. Nothing that there's nothing wrong with being an outsider, because there's always been syndicated shows, but a lot of times those are talk and issue oriented programs, news. It wasn't on a local radio station where you had somebody who lived in the next town over on the radio playing some of your favorite tunes that, well known in Rochester. Maybe they don't know Duke Jupiter out in Iowa. They don't know the Good Rats out in Iowa, but they sure do know them here.
Right.
You don't hear that anymore. That's the other thing. When I left, so did a lot of music that I knew would fit.
It would never get played again.
Yeah, would consultants say, well, it was always like, is it necessary? And I would say, well, yeah. It sets us apart from other people, and it caters to the listeners. So, if I had a radio station, I'd look to sell it and make a profit. I don't need that aggravation anymore.
Well done.
I don't need that aggravation.
The going back to, so one of the things when I was trying to get into radio down in South Florida, and I ended up getting into video as I went to school for radio, and then went into video, and then 25 years passed, and I ended up here. I always wanted to be like, a jock on that rock station, the rock station that hosted all that headlined all the concerts, that got to meet all of the rock stars.
That was every city.
Yeah.
Big and small.
Yeah. But you got to do that. You got to be that guy so if you could choose, and I know this is probably impossible, but if you could choose, like, what was your kind of like most awe-inspiring moment as a jock, like meeting a hero?
All right. Well, first, let me tell you that while I was at Brockport pursuing a communications degree, I took plenty of radio and writing, but I was also taking TV production and video, because they had a TV station, and I was in the technical end, camera and directing. Talent, was just goofing around all the time.
Sure.
But I said, all right, it could be radio or TV. Because I was getting pretty good at it, at either one, and radio presented itself first. And then I just took off from there. And as a result of all the great video training, I took some great home videos, leading the action and fading out, no choppy videos here, don't you know? But let's see, most awe-inspiring, geez, certainly when I met certain people, I met Springsteen twice. I'm trying to think who I just met so many people. There's a couple. It's easy for me to tell who I didn't meet that I would have liked to, but most awe-inspiring. That's a tough one.
What about who was there somebody that was completely different than you thought or than you hoped? It was a letdown?
No, because I learned about when interviewing, the last thing you want to do is ask them the same questions. And, well, when's your new album out? Hey, where do you go after here? Exactly. So I try to find out something about their interests, and then surprise them. Hey, so what about, I hear you like, collecting salamanders, whatever. And
Ozzy?
Right. Just to find something that they could talk about where it wasn't, 100 times before. But, certainly I met a lot of people. Every rock and roller I met was personable, gracious. Only two that stood out as being real jerkballs. So, but I met a lot, so that was a pretty small percentage.
Yeah.
But it was always just such a gas to just be able to hang with them and meet. I developed relationship with little Steven, to the point where I had his phone number and I could call him. Not that I ever did, but he said, "You call me if you need."
And you're thinking, trying to figure out a reason to call him.
Well, little Steven was involved with the Chesterfield Kings, and I'm friendly with all of those guys. And little Steven had a show on Sirius, still does, and he was going on vacation, and he wanted the lead singer of the Chesterfield Kings, Greg Prevost, to fill in for him, but he had to audition for the satellite people. So they called me, the band called me and says, "Do you have a satellite link, and can we come in and rent it, the downlink. And I said, yeah, come on in. But, you don't got to pay me for anything. They're in there for an hour or so. And Steven called me at home. He called me on my cell phone. He says, Kane-O, it's little Steven. I go, get the out of here. He says, no, thanks for what you did for the band. You didn't have to do that. And we also had a couple other mutual friends. So that was really cool to have little Steven call me. And then other rockers who came through, like the guys in Styx, all remember me because I've been there forever every time they came through.
Yeah.
So that was. I think that would be awe-inspiring that there were musicians
and they remembered you.
That remembered me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then an interview would take on a whole new tone, like old pals. Even though we didn't talk, we didn't exchange Christmas cards.
But it's still that level of familiarity would totally
I was
open
like
up
me, some schmuck from Brooklyn. I got little Steven's number, and I'm going to go meet up with this guy, and I'm going to have drinks with it. It was beyond my wildest imagination. My original goal, excuse me, in radio was to get back to New York City and work at the station that I love, which was the late great WNEW-FM. And that was the station I was to with the jocks who, look, that's how I patterned myself after. Personable, easygoing, knowing a lot about my job and the music. And but after a couple of years in Rochester, and I guess after about 5 years, I started looking for other opportunities. I wanted to get into programming. So I interviewed in Syracuse and Albany and Buffalo. And I did get offered a job in Buffalo, and I accepted it. But then after 2-3 days of not sleeping, I said, I'm going to stay. Because I was 3 weeks away from closing on the house that I live in. Stood to lose a couple of dollars on that. But more importantly, the radio station here met what they were offering me. I said, oh, good, because I wanted to stay anyway, and it turned out to be the best decision because I realized that I really loved living here and working here, and this is where my life was. So like I said, I spent my formative years in Brooklyn, but I grew up upstate here in Western New York. I mean, I'm 63.
Became a man in Rochester.
Yeah, exactly. So it just got to a point where I said quality of life decisions rule, and that's why I was here for so long. I just loved what I was doing and where I was doing it for who I was doing it for.
Yeah. And you skip that sort of the old story of radio people that are jumping from town to town, market to market.
Yeah, it's a transient business by nature.
Yeah. And that was one of the things when I first was going to school for it. I was in South Florida, so Fort Lauderdale, Miami, Palm Beach was a marking 11, I think it was number 11. Yeah. And I remember our teachers, the professor saying, you're probably not going to get a job. You're not on air. Maybe not maybe part-time, but not full-time. And so they're like, be prepared to go to do the cattle report in Wichita. I never did that. I ended up doing radio here because it was a fallback.
Yeah.
And I knew Stan Main.
Right.
And I found out he was a program director. I'm like, I've never actually worked in radio, but I went to school for it. Let's give it a shot.
Sounds like fun.
And, and I do, I left right in the middle of 2020, in July of 2020. I left and I was done.
Yeah.
I
miss mornings on Fickle, right?
I missed doing that, but I didn't miss I really felt like I was basically going nowhere. There was nowhere for me to go from there. And
if you wanted to go somewhere.
Unless I wanted to leave.
You being considerably younger than me, I could see how you might say, there are still other horizons I want to get to. But, I found, my line to this day has always been, I was fortunate that I found something I like to do in a place I like to do it. And everything just started falling into place. And something you mentioned about, having to go do cattle reports in Kansas or whatever, at least those opportunities were available back then.
Right.
I went to college with a guy who wanted to go into radio and do sports. So you're already in a niche business and then a niche part of that. Yeah. So he had to go down to deepest, darkest, I think, Mississippi to do sports. And he's a New York Jew, and he's down in Mississippi doing sports. And he had to change his name. His name is Mitch Cohen. He changed it to Mitch Cobb. So,
nice name.
And I had so many friends who left a trail of marriages and mortgages, and I look at, I still get industry trades, and I look and I go, oh, here's Scotty Fitzpatrick. Scotty's previously worked in Wichita and Fort Myers, and geez, that's a lot of moving around. And you wonder why, a lot of us are single.
Right.
Because people just get tired of moving around. And some guys have moved around a lot all over the country. I said, nah, not for me. I put down roots here and that's it. I'm rooted. After a while, I lost the wanderlust and the desire to go anywhere else because I loved what I was doing, where I was doing it. It worked out well.
I'd say that's a hell of a way to end this episode.
Yeah, and thank you so much for
words.
Yeah, well, it's just what happened to me, and I was very fortunate. And again, quality of life decisions got me to where I am, and some grit and determination, and being able to duck.
Yeah, normally when I do these things, I would ask someone, like, do you have any advice for someone who wants? And I don't think I even want to offer that up. Like, what would you advice for someone going into radio would be? Don't go into radio.
That has been mine. I know in years past, I would get college classes would come in. Brockport would always send their latest, freshman class or whatever, and I would say, all right, so how many of you are serious about radio as a career? And, half the group would raise their hands and say, well, my advice to you is to consider a career in healthcare. And I said, look, I don't mean to be a dream crusher, but I'm telling you right now that the way things are going is that all the entry-level positions will be going away, weekends, part-times, vacation fill-ins, all going away. And what few live positions will be available will not pay well, and there won't be room to move. For the most part. I mean, we did get people who were, started as interns and ended up on the air. Very few.
Yeah.
You're in the right place at the right time, doing the right thing. But with all those entry-level positions going, it became fruitless, really. And again, unless you're going to be a big, high-profile morning show or something like that, you ain't going to make money. Not in a market this size or smaller, not necessarily even in bigger markets. And it's just a sad truth. I hate to, to shit on a profession, but
well, you know what?
It got kind of shitty.
It's not a whole lot of haberdashers around either. So,
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes
things change, right?
Things change.
And radio, the way a lot of people my age knew it, is going the way of the rotary phone. It's becoming an app. It's becoming a choice. Whereas radio used to be the focus, now content is the focus for these companies and how to disseminate it. We got podcasts, we got webcasts, we got a website, we have this. So it's changed in that way. And I'm 63. I don't listen to podcasts. I don't have friends who listen to podcasts. I guess it's more of a younger generation. And this is, of course, who they're after. Once you're 55, radio companies are not really interested.
You don't exist.
Yeah, pretty much, which is a shame. I remember in the past, let me know if we're running too long.
No.
But we used to always refer, when we were in the ratings, okay, well, our ratings target, our demographics, 25 to 54. Wham's radio demographics are 55 to death. But there's a lot of classic rockers now in that age demo, and they have money to spend, but apparently not enough, so... that's progress, my friend. That's the way it goes. I got in at a great time and was able to ride it out.
Well, I'm glad that I got to work with you for a very short time, but I was honored to be there.
You were in there pitching away. You were giving your best, and that was that position is very tenuous, very demanding, very stressful.
Yeah.
Because the guy who came after you also was it you were before or after Dan?
After.
Okay, yeah, Dan's head exploded.
Yeah.
it's that kind of, and you saw
I had to mop up the pieces of brain.
Exactly. And that's basically what producers are, mop-up men or women,
Yeah.
Not only do you have to, you got to take care of a lot of stuff. And again, that's not a well-paid position.
No, and that's the funny thing. When I'm looking back, I'm like, why was I struggling so? Because I wanted a full-time job in radio so bad that I was just like, yeah.
Like anything you really want, you're willing to make sacrifices.
Right.
And I knew when I first got in, there were personal and financial sacrifices that I would have to realize that included moving here and not knowing people. Again, I didn't have to do that much at all. I worked at 3 stations my entire career, so that was all right. And I never had to move farther than from Geneva to Rochester, so that was easy.
What's your what are you doing these days? Like what fills your time?
All right, so the beginning of summer, a couple of projects, long overdue projects in the house, redoing the deck. I have a couple other things, but most of the time, in that time, I enjoy I don't mean to sound like a cosmic muffin, but just being, sitting out in the morning on the deck with my coffee, just nice and quiet where I live, or in the evening. But I've been able to have lunches with friends and catch up on things. If I see something around the house that needs my attention, I can pay attention to it. I don't have to put it on a to-do list. It's basically having time and control of my time and how I use it. No stress. There's no urgency to anything I got to do. I miss the performance aspect to a degree, and certainly when I go out, people say, "Man, we really miss you," and I love hearing that, but I hate hearing that because I guess look, I went out on top and I left them wanting more. So I guess that's one way to look at it.
That's how you do it.
Yeah.
Well,
So-
you're always welcome to come back here and use the mic anytime you want.
Yeah. A lot of people said I should do a podcast, and if somebody's listening, say, yeah, you should. One of the reasons I haven't is because there's a lot of podcasts out there about classic rock. Two, it involves work, it involves preparation, it involves things that I wouldn't necessarily mind doing, but not on a regular basis. And then you got to monetize it. Yeah. So it's work, and I retired.
Right. There you go.
I'll do podcasts for other people,
and
I'll fill in on the radio every now and then if I get the chance. But don't be searching the podcast stores for mine. So
Unless you're on the rock radio.
right, unless I'm here with Fitz on Rock Vox on a rock radio.
Thank you for coming in, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Fitzy. Bye, everybody.